Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down. Okoro slammed it home. Garland upstairs. Oh! Sexton inside. A thunderous dunk. And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. Support for this podcast is brought to you by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live sports and TV for half the cost of cable. There's no contract and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. And joining me today is my co-host, a man whose takes will always be free because he's a good guy that charges fair market value, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
That was a good compliment sold out of you.
You know,
it started nice, ended mean. Words. I was proud of you. I don't think you've ever whipped that one out before, but it was well done.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice to get back into the two read mode for the podcast. I feel like we're at our best when we've got multiple reads going on.
Yes, you are truly in your element when you're showing.
You are not wrong. How you doing, buddy? How you been?
I'm good, man. This is the last podcast up in the old office.
That's right.
I've got a new basement office getting built. It's going to be all spiffy and nice and much cooler with a much more dependable internet connection, which I know you're going to be thrilled about. Going to be hardwired finally. Yeah, really, really excited for that. Getting ready to go to London in a couple weeks for work. So
you got a lot going on, man. So I'm excited to see the layer of takes.
I'm staying nice and busy during the Cavaliers off season. Let's just say that much.
You're putting in that off-season work, and I appreciate that. And in addition to that, you came up with a great idea for a podcast. Today, we are going to talk about a lot of the core members of the Cavs, both on and off the court, and decide, or at least give our takes on how much they have to prove in this upcoming season. You're something to prove-o-meter. We can workshop the name.
I was going ometer, like a thermometer, something to prove-ometer.
I like that, like a little bit of heat with the pressure of this upcoming season.
You know what? It was an unconscious choice, but I think you're right. I think that's why I was leaning in that direction with the something to proveometer. And I think you have to say it real fast too.
Sounds good. Kind of like Cavs Canada. Looks great in writing, but then when you say it out loud, it just falls right apart.
We've never talked about this, but I have a hard time saying it every time I've ever had to explain who you were.
Well, hopefully you don't have to explain who I am too often, but you know what? We should get straight into this and start things off with the man who probably deserved Rookie of the Year, but is a very, very exciting core part of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that's Evan Mobley. And since this was your concept, Carter, I will let you go with the first take.
Yeah, so we're going on a scale of 1 to 10 on the something to proveometer. And I think for Mobley, it really, really depends on how you want to frame it. But I'm putting a cool 6.5 for him. I think that he has proven that he is a winning player as a rookie. So he's so far ahead of the curve. He's already proven in the eyes of a lot of people that he is a truly, truly elite prospect. I think any jump in the ometer is probably a byproduct of a couple things: not winning Rookie of the Year, and basically if he wants to go taking a monster unnecessary leap.
Don't say unnecessary. If he wants to do that, don't you dare.
Well, you know what I'm saying. I think most people would forgive a slower growth curve after such an immense start. So, but if he comes out and is, let's say, 5 to 10% better than he was last year, I'm really, really happy with that. So, like, short of the Rookie of the Year slight, which, you could argue isn't a slight, depending on how you feel about Scotty Barnes.
Scotty Barnes, he put up a Rookie of the Year caliber season. There's no denying that.
So, if you're him and you want to prove that you're no doubt the best rookie, but even then, I'm going to amend this in real time. I'm going down to 5.5 because I don't think anyone thinks he's not the best rookie in his class as a prospect. And I just think heading into this year, he shouldn't really be feeling that much pressure. So if he does take a big leap, then I'm really impressed.
So I don't want to get too bogged down on this because I would still I'm sticking with my pre-draft take. I think Cade and Mobley are right up there in terms of the best prospects. Like they're 1A, 1B, and it kind of comes down to team fit and preference. And just kind of the value of a playmaking wing is so high in today's league that I could understand if someone says Cade. But I think highest upside altogether, if you hit that 99 percentile outcome, it's Evan Mobley in this draft class. But I'm going down to 4 for him because I just feel there are other players that have more pressure on them within this Cavs roster, whether it's internal competition or just the weight of expectations, right? And with Evan Mobley, like you said, if you get like a 5 to 10, 15% increase on his production and he just becomes a little bit more reliable, that's going to make a big difference. But I think he is still so young that it's hard for me to put a lot of pressure on him next season. Especially when growth isn't necessarily linear. He's probably going to be trying a few things next year. And I think if he's looking to expand his game, you're going to expect some mistakes along the way. You're going to expect setbacks and that sort of thing. And because of that, because we're still in a wait and see trying thing mode with Mobley, even though he is so good so early on, for that reason, I put it down to like a 4. That's about as high as I'd go, but I like that we're not defining how we should do these scales because this is such a subjective conversation.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's certainly a fair rating for Mobley. I think the more I think about it, the less I like being higher than 5. But I'm going to stick at 5.5 for now. Let's move on to the next one though, because I think we're not going to go low on this guy, and it's Isaac Okoro. What's your something to prove-ometer at with Isaac?
It's really high. I have it at an 8. And again, this is tough because Okoro is only, I think, 4 or 5 months older than Mobley, right? And he is getting his first real offseason. And I think there's such an interesting contrast going on with Isaac Okoro and Colin Sexton because both players could be key contributors to the Cavs. And there are merits to what they bring to the table alongside the core. But with Colin Sexton, you get the argument, hey, this is a guy that puts up a lot of numbers, but the success hasn't come within the team concept yet. Is this going to work out? Isaac Okoro is the opposite, where the team numbers, the team stats are all a lot better when he's on the court. From January on last year, it was only Darius Garland and Dean Wade that had better on-off ratings. And the offense, surprisingly, improved a substantial amount with him on the court. Now, a lot of that's probably because he's playing with Darius Garland, but at the same time, this is somebody that has worked within the context of the team, but hasn't put up those individual numbers. So I think when you look at the internal competition that's here, whether it's Caris LeVert, Colin Sexton, who for the purposes of this conversation, we are going to continue assuming he's part of the team because there's a qualifying offer extended to him. So until something changes, we are going to continue to say that Sexton is part of this. So from Caris LeVert, Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, like there's so many different options, and there's going to be a real crunch and a lot of pressure to go out there and earn those minutes. And he just, to me, I'm very interested to see what a real offseason does for him, but there's no denying that there's a lot of pressure. And I think my rating for all of those guys in the mix is going to be higher because there is so much internal competition present.
I think it's a cool 10.
Oh, you're going all the way up.
I think he has more to prove at an individual level than anyone else on the team. I think he is playing for his spot in the Cavs core moving forward. I think that they are, we've talked about it quite a bit. We've talked about the fact that it's so unfair to the guy that he got brought in to be a project who's 3-4 years away offensively, and then all of a sudden in year 2 go, well, actually, we need you to be good enough to win right now on offense. Yeah. But you know what? We're here. And he got played off the floor in the play-in games. That matters a lot. He needs to go prove that he has enough juice to become a 16-game player in stiffer competition. I think that the Cavs still need to be very, very invested in getting the most they can out of Isaac, because as much as, Chris Fedor, he's talked about quite a bit about how enamored the Cavs are with the Garland, LeVert, Lauri, Mobley, Allen starting lineup. That's a lineup without a good point of attack defender, let alone a great one. And I think, if you really,
at least on the perimeter,
yeah, and that's what I mean. Point of attack on the perimeter.
Well, I'm just
yes, Mobley is a great switch defender.
Yes,
but as is Jarrett. But you're not going to go put him on James Harden or some of these lead guards that dominate the ball. So I think that ultimately Isaac, if looks like I'm pushing again. It looks like just a software end on my end. The chat is killing me right now. I don't know if we're back yet. But Tom N just said, yeah, I think we're back. We're back. Tom N just said, YouTube believes in Okoro and will not have any questions about his play. All right, we're back. So we can do a pickup. So for the audio side of the pod. Thanks, gang.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Carter, next up on the list is JB Bickerstaff and the coaching staff. And you had this pretty high on your list of topics that you wanted to discuss in this podcast. Where do you have JB and the rest of the coaching staff?
Yeah, I wanted to put this on because I do think it's interesting because on one hand, JB probably would tell you, I got nothing to prove. I just got an extension. I just led this team to a bet to, 18 more wins than we were expected to win on the over-under.
That sounds way more arrogant than any JB I've ever heard in an interview.
Fair. That's fair. Maybe JB's best friend would say that. To some extent he has nothing to prove, but on the other hand, I think his coaching job is actually more complicated this year. He has gotten so much credit for his interpersonal skills, for his ability to manage the locker room. Kevin Love credits him all the time, even through their darkest stretches. As being, someone who has always been honest with him and straight with him. And it was a big reason he accepted coming off the bench last year, which people don't remember was controversial. But I'm going to go ahead and at least say it like a 6.5 because JB has 10 dudes at minimum who are going to expect to play 20 to 25 minutes a game, or at least think they deserve to play 20 to 25 minutes a game. And that's not including Robin Lopez, Dean Wade, Lamar Stevens. These are guys who played real minutes for their teams last year.
Howell Neto played real minutes for the Wizards.
Yeah, and Howell Neto, once Rubio's back, is almost certainly out of the rotation. So you look at it, to some extent, it's an embarrassment of riches. But last year, it was almost easy from the perspective of JB was just going to play the 8 guys he thought he could trust, and when it was really time to win, and you could kind of very easily justify cutting someone out of the rotation. So let's say Ochai Agbaji is your 10th man, and he's not getting much burn. And LeVert comes out in a big shooting slump. What do you do? Do you start cutting back LeVert's minutes and mess with his confidence and to play the players who are playing maybe a little bit better, give shots to people you're also invested in to get reps? Do you keep LeVert out there and possibly piss off guys like Ochai Agbaji who are like, dude, he's not even playing well. Why don't I get any burn? I think his job is harder this year than it was last year. And to that extent, and this is where good coaches are separated from great coaches. There have been, tons of coaches who have coached teams above their punching weight and then, just kind of plateaued. I think he does have something to prove, and it's that he is, much like Isaac has to prove he's a 16-game player, I think JB might have to prove he's a 16-game coach.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something we're necessarily going to find out this season.
Maybe not 16-game, but this is the bridge season to it, which is why I don't have his number that high.
Yeah, and I came in at the same number with 6. And to me, the interesting question is, so much of the conversation about JB that we've had in the past has been, is it personnel or is it system, right? Because so frequently the personnel has been changing. The amount of options that you had kind of would go out the window. And we saw at the start of last year that there was a nice ball movement offense. Garland got to play off ball a whole lot more. It was creative, right? It was nothing groundbreaking, but it was a lot more creative than we had seen in the past. And we've talked about this before, but rather than building on top of that, you just lost ball handler after ball handler and option after option, and things had to be stripped down to some extent. Now, it's a credit to them that they managed to find multiple versions and multiple identities that worked. But now that we know the Garland heliocentric offense works, how comfortable are you going away in the name of offensive diversity where, okay, we're going to try a few things. We're going to maybe take some lumps along the way. We're going to have Mobley initiate from the high post. We're going to have multiple ball handlers on the court. We're going to run some off-ball action for Ochai, and we've got all these other things that we can do. How comfortable are you showing that diversity when you do know in your back pocket, hey, we've got the Garland spread pick and roll here. We can put Lauri and Ochai out there, run double drag with Garland, Mobley, and Allen, and we're going to have a very good offense when we do that. So to me, it's going to be really interesting to see how he manages all these different playing styles, what combinations are used, how deep they go,
how much time he takes to experiment.
Yeah, how long my voice is going to last on the podcast without blowing a tire. Like there's a whole lot of things that are unknown at this point. But I'm very interested to see that, because that's why I go to 6 on the prove it meter here. Rather, it's not necessarily like a hot seat type conversation. It's more, how much are we expecting to learn from JB? How much more pressure is on him and the rest of the coaching staff? And I do think when you have this many mouths to feed, the minutes crunch that you alluded to as well, there is a lot to find out with this coaching staff. And I think it's encouraging that we've seen consistent buy-in from the team, and that's usually one of the most important things. So I'm just interested to see what form that ends up taking this year.
Yeah, it's a weird year. I think there's always going to be fans that say JB, it's a 10 on the provometer for JB, because there's just a little bit too much stock put into individual head coach stuff. We've talked about it a lot. But I do think
it's always easier to attribute whatever you're frustrated with to the coaching staff, because that is easier to change than the roster, and being honest that, hey, some internal growth is still needed. These players still need to work on their flaws, especially on a team this young.
Yeah, but with that said, I do think it's an interesting season, at least for JB. I think I'm really excited to see how he tackles these challenges, how often he's willing to mess around, take short-term L's to play with new lineups. It'll be I think he does have something to prove. And it's how great of a coach is he?
Yeah. Yep. I'm very curious to see what this season ends up looking like. I'm actually pretty confident. Like I think that it's going to look good, but there still is a fair bit that we need to find out. Carter, this next one, divisive Colin Sexton. How high are you going with this one? I have a feeling it's going to be high.
I actually have a bit of a cop-out answer, which is it depends on what kind of contracts he's on. I think if he ends up on that qualifying offer on an expiring deal, entering the marketplace, it's like an 11, man. Like if you are like, me and you were talking about like this idea that almost no one ever takes a qualifying offer, but like the Cavs would be making a big mistake if, like that. This has been the narrative. Like if they let him sign the QO, it's a big mistake. And we were talking about like the players who followed that path and, or bet on themselves in free agency, turn down a big contract and then, or a decent term contract and then just nothing was there for them. Dennis Schroeder, Nerlens Noel. It happens to guys who have actual cachet. Dennis Schroeder was considered a very important part of that Lakers team, and there was nothing for him. Yeah. So it has happened before. So if he comes out on an expiring deal and then has a prove it year, and the prove it year doesn't go so well, then I think he's really going to be kicking himself. And this is going to be, I think, in a lot of ways, assuming he is with the Cavs, this is going to be you don't think the rest of the league is going to have an eye on a guy that they're not sure about whether he's a winning player or not? So if he has a bad year or the team is worse with him on the floor or whatever it might be, I think the rest of the league is really going to take that to heart, because this is the first, this would be the first long-term winning situation he'd been in. So I think, it's very, very high. Now, if he's on a long-term deal, I'm honestly knock a couple numbers off that, because I think he's the kind of guy who might take a second to adjust. And as long as he's locked in, maybe the Cavs are more, willing to move on from that glut at the 2 guard. In terms of Sexton, if the fit isn't working great, but I don't think he needs to come out and just be an absolute boss from Jump Street if he has a little bit more security. Whereas I think it's going to be a real a riskier proposition than I think a lot of people are acknowledging for a guy in his position, just based on a couple of the historicals.
Yeah, I was thinking strictly on court, and I'm going 10 regardless of the situation.
Wow.
Because Colin Sexton, like from everything that we've heard, whether it's when we talked to Martin Rickman, who did a wonderful profile on him, or just all the stuff Kobe Altman says, like, this is a guy whose focus has been winning. And I'm sure that he has heard all the conversations that are out there. You see how hard that guy works in the gym. And I think for himself, more than anyone else, he wants to go out there and prove that he can be a contributor to a winning team. And I think there is a lot of there's a lot to prove there, right? Because I do think people too easily dismiss what he's done in the past, and I think people have overlooked consistently the growth that he's made and the adjustments he's made to his game, whether it's changing what position he plays, playing off ball more, getting the 3-point volume up. You see the attempts per 36 go up by at least a half attempt every single year, right? Like, he has put a lot of work into adjusting his game. And I don't think that there has been, in the kind of general or national conversation around him, or even conversation within Cavs fans, I don't think that has been acknowledged fairly. I get it to some extent, where when the team wasn't winning as much, people don't tune in. And then the one year that they are winning, he gets hurt and doesn't get the chance that others had to change the narrative around them. So for that reason, I'm going 10, regardless of the situation, because I think changing the perception around him and proving that he can contribute with these guys that, I mean, he was so invested on the bench last year, cheering them on, being part of the team, even though he couldn't be on the court. I think all of that matters to him, if I had to make an assumption, and that's why I put that so high on the prove it meter.
Yeah, and please respect the process, the provometer. I think you're right. I think it's going to be a real interest, like, fair or not, how he works on this team. If the team starts going sideways with him back on the floor, you don't think that executives and other coaches are going to be noticing and thinking about that? I think
fair or not.
Fair or not. That's just the way it is. So I agree. It's very high, pretty much no matter what. Though I think we should, acknowledge the risks at play if he is on an expiring. Let's move on down the list, Justin, to a guy who I'm feeling free and easy about. Our boy Jarrett Allen. Where is Jarrett on the provometer?
This is my lowest. I'm going 3. I'm not going any lower than that, because you're an NBA player. You're always looking to prove something.
Yeah, that's probably the bottom of our scale.
Yeah, but
for anyone who's not like a 18-year vet.
For Jarrett Allen, like, it's, I think what we're hoping for is what we saw last year, which was improvement within the margins. He already had an all-star caliber year. I don't think he necessarily needs to be an all-star again. But, in terms of what he needs to prove, he just needs to go out there and continue what he's doing. And if he improves 5% in all the things that he does well, we're going to be in really, really good shape, because he is one of the best young centers in the NBA, and a guy that has just consistently understood his role. I don't have a lot of questions or concerns going into this year with Jarrett Allen.
If 3 is our conceptual lowest number for a person of Jarrett's experience level, then he is also a 3 for me. Okay. If this dude came back and had exactly the same season, like, maybe that is what he has to prove, is that is what he can be every year.
Yeah.
So like maybe there's something there, but like, like anything I want for this guy is like real stretch goal stuff. Like, like, can you keep the defensive rating really, really strong even without Evan. No matter it, can you get to the point? Can you get to that like almost Rudy Gobert effect at some point in terms of your defensive quarterbacking ability, where you can, almost independent of personnel, guarantee a certain number, no higher than a certain number in your defensive rating. But like that is such a stretch goal. Like I don't think he has to prove that he can do that, because that would be quite a leap for him. So like I think a 3 is the right number, because this dude's done everything we can ask of him thus far as a Cavalier. And, and I just think, like, especially for his archetype, he's probably got the least pressure of the entire team. I mean, maybe there's something to the two big pairing working in the postseason this year. Maybe he'll have to prove that works and he won't get played off the floor. But I also don't think he'll get played off the floor. So I don't really think he has to prove that.
If there are some issues there, like some of that is likely going to need to be addressed maybe by a little more internal growth or tweaks to the roster around them. Like I don't think a lot of that would come down to Jarrett Allen. And I mean, you look at the stats last year, the defender who held the opponents to the lowest field goal percentage within 6 feet of the basket was Jarrett Allen. He was the best at that last year at 48.6% at a crazy high volume too. Like the man is really, really good, and he fits well with all the other core pieces. Just not a lot of questions there. Carter, where would you put the provometer? This is why I did prove it meter. Where would you put it for us going into next year?
For us?
The Chase Down podcast, where would you put it?
Oh, buddy. Free and easy as well. Don't let our bosses hear this, but I'm saying a cool. I'd say a 3 or 4. I think we're in a good rhythm here, my friend.
I'm up to 7.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
up to 7 on us, and like honestly, like some of it is every podcast that we do, my anxiety is through the roof. I'm just so hard on myself. I think the coolest thing about what we get to do is we don't have to act like we're experts. We don't have to act like we have sources, but that's also probably one of the greatest sources of my insecurity and imposter syndrome kicking in. But I gotta tell you, Carter, I do feel a little bit better and more comfortable when we do this podcasting because of our partners with Zoom. They are just so reliable.
If you're insecure, there's nothing like the warm blanket that is Zoom.
There's absolutely nothing like it. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects.
How many pods do you think we're going to go before, our dear friend John and Brandon at the Cavs come up to us and go, guys, maybe stop ad-libbing around the reads.
Oh, come on. No. This is selling it. And it's all coming from the heart. We were on the Zoom train before they were a sponsor, before the pandemic even. We were
I was
early
told
adopters.
You referred to Zoom as a warm blanket. I don't think that's in their brand guide.
You know what? It should be. It absolutely should be. I took a shot and I nailed it. Just like known shot taker Caris LeVert. He makes tough shots all the time, Carter. Where do you have him going into this year?
Oh, man. You know what? If Colin is a 10, why isn't Caris a 10? This is a strange conversation to me. Strange, like even with regards to our own coverage, we spend so much time focusing on Colin, and maybe it's because he's the guy that we drafted. He's a bit younger, but like Caris is in the exact same situation. Caris has been a guy who, over the course of his career, has been able to score on good, not great teams, and not really been able to take that leap, not been able to stay on the floor, not been able to prove he's a great defensive player despite having pretty good size for the position. I think that as much as if Colin is a 10, then Caris is a 10, because I think teams probably have their eye on Caris too. I don't think people were like, you look at the trade grades, the reaction from the Caris trade. No one was giving the Cavs an A+. There was like are we sure about this guy as a true winning player? And I think there's a similar skepticism around the league around Caris. And I think he has a really good chance this year to prove like, hey, I can be a good system defender. Hey, I can, when I'm actually healthy, I can be a great secondary player maker for this team. And by the way, I'm a better catch and shoot 3-point shooter than I showed too. I think it's going to be
actually his catch and shoot numbers were great. He's just got to take more of them.
Yeah,
for the love of God, it was over 40%.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see, what he brings to the table, because not only do the Cavs have a decision next year, probably with Colin, probably with Isaac, they have to decide whether they're going to invest in Caris long term. So I think he very much has something to prove, because if the Cavs decide that like meh, then I think it probably has some ripple effects for his next couple jobs.
Probably, and I'm going with an 8. The UFA status after this season obviously factors into that. A lot of the points you touched on were correct. What I want to see from Caris in terms of what I would like to see him prove is, we know the scoring is going to come in bunches. He's streaky at times. There's going to be those hot and cold spells. Is there something he can reliably bring to the table now that he knows what this situation is, what his expectations are within the role? He's going to have a training camp, whether it is reliable playmaking. Like, look at the difference Ricky Rubio made last year with very inconsistent finishing, whether it's at the rim, the outside shooting wasn't great, but he still made such a big impact because he was out there generating looks for others and providing that reliable playmaking. Caris is obviously a much better scorer than Ricky Rubio is, and the expectations from a playmaking standpoint aren't going to be at Rubio levels, but can he consistently bring that to the table? If the answer is yes, there is a role for him within this team. I mean, there's a role for him with anywhere within the league, because microwave scorers, there's a spot for those guys in every single team. But if you can bring that one reliable trait to the table, it changes how you're perceived. And for me, the playmaking is the one that I want to see most of. But I definitely feel, whether it's the internal competition and other guys that are going to be battling for minutes there, UFA status, or just the pressure and the looking to justify why the Cavs felt that they needed to go out and add you to the team. There's a fair bit for Caris to prove next year.
And you know what? I actually want to focus my something to prove vibes with Caris specifically on the defensive end. I think that there are people who weren't thrilled with his offensive output. I saw plenty of good reads. Like even that Atlanta game, that Nets game where the jumper was just like the scoring was just not there. I thought I thought the offense looked better when he was on the floor.
His offense was pretty good in Atlanta. Yeah. Like there were stretches where he really made a big difference.
You're right, but I guess I was mostly talking about that Brooklyn game when people were like, get Caris off the floor. Like there was a lot of I thought vitriol on social, and I was like, I don't know. I think he actually looks pretty good. It's just not. It's like the results aren't following the general flow of the offense. But I thought the offense was flowing pretty well with him out there. So with a lot of players who were not quite ready for that moment. So, I think really it is the defensive end. If they're going to play the starting lineup, I talked about it within the Okoro segment. Like if they're going to play the starting lineup, he can't space out off ball. He can't sit on his heels when he's guarding the ball instead of hanging on his toes and get blown by, or lunge at a pump fake because he's off balance. Like so much of Caris's defensive woes I felt for the Cavs were in the details. And I thought he just lost the details too often. So I really think he has to prove like, hey, against good teams in a playoff series, this starting lineup can't fall apart because I'm the best defender. So I think that's really where he has to prove it to me heading into this year.
It's a pretty good take. Where do you have Darius Garland, who is next on our list?
Oh, man. I actually want you to go first. I'm curious what you think.
I'm going 8. I'm going 8 with Darius Garland because not in this is an unknown commodity and some of the conversations that we had with guys like Isaac Okoro, but when you get that first Supermax extension, when you burst onto the scene as an all-star, as one of the best up-and-coming point guards, the national narrative and the expectations for you change. The level of consistency that's expected of you, that all changes. People go, when you go from the rookie contract, and honestly, this process starts earlier now than it ever has. But when you kind of make that transition, the focus goes from what you can do to what you can't do. And I think from a leadership perspective, on and off the floor, there's going to be a lot of expectations for Garland. He wants to prove that he can take another step forward from last year. You've heard in recent interviews where he was talking about how he wants to make a legitimate run in the playoffs. And I'm not necessarily judging this on how far the Cavs go or whether or not he has any struggles. I expect struggles. I expect mistakes in the process of getting better. But I do think that when you're looking to elevate yourself to that level, you have a lot to prove. And I have a very high level of confidence when it comes to Darius Garland. The offseason hype videos are certainly helping there as well. That stuff is it's candy for me, man. Like I've got a sweet tooth and I will watch every single offseason highlight video. But I do think that there's a lot for Garland to prove, and it falls again in that category where I'm confident in how he's going to perform and how he's going to rise to the challenge. But I just think it's reality of today's NBA where there is going to be a lot of expectations on you, and I think he's ready for it.
I think I agree. I don't know if people would expect us to put a high number on here. I'm going to put 7.5. I think he has to go prove that he can go be maybe a top 5 point guard in the league. I think he's. Do you think? Sorry to interrupt you, but do you think he has to do that this season, or can it be similar to what we saw in the past, where the baseline is close to the player we saw last year, but you see those top 5 flashes? I think that's fair. I think he has to I think you're right, and I'm going to have to amend my statement, which I hate to do on your account. But I think that he has to prove that he's definitely a top 10 point guard. We have seen, this is a volatile position, by the way. People probably don't think about this very often, but you can have a great year one year and just be like pretty good the rest of the way. And, you know, if he's it's kind of like quarterbacks, where quarterbacks are like the only position where you might see a little bit of an off year and then they still bounce back, whereas other position groups, like the fall off usually means they're falling off. It's very similar to that, where there is just that high level of competition. Yeah, it's such a stacked position group, and he's so important for this team that if he's 5% worse next year, that's probably going to knock off 4 or 5 wins, because you're saying that like that's even possible, buddy. I know. You're saying that like it's possible. 5% worse? So I think you have to prove that. Yeah, I mean, well, you get dinged up, Justin. Things happen. You know, you go through a cold stretch. 25 and 10 with a bad back, man. Yeah, you know what? Absolutely fair. I'm saying is I'm saying 5% better is a disaster. I think he does have to prove that he is truly like a no-doubter all-star moving forward. And then, you know, I think you're right that the top 5 thing maybe comes the year after this upcoming season, when it's like, hey, if you can't, because that's when the Cavs are starting, that this Cavs core is going to start needing to figure out, like, hey, what's like our actual ceiling? Are we a conference finals contender? Because you're not really a conference finals contender if you don't have your one of your best players, your lead ball handler, in the top 5 in his position group. You know what I mean? So like, I think that's why he does have something to prove, though. Obviously, he proved a hell of a lot last season. Yeah, and I think the other component of something to prove is prove it in the postseason. Like, I thought he had a great game against Brooklyn. I thought he actually played really well against Atlanta. The shots just didn't fall, and there's a difference between shooting poorly and playing poorly, and I think it was the former. As my dog jumps into the shot behind me. But you know, I think showing that he can elevate his game in the postseason, and kind of similar to what we saw with Kyrie in that first run, where maybe the point guards he's up against
people rate higher on the season when you're talking about season averages, consistency and all that. But can you be the best point guard in a series, or can you play at the same level as some of these other elite point guards? Because reality is you're going to be playing against Drew Holiday, Trae Young, and other great point guards in the Eastern Conference. James Harden is functionally the point guard for Philly. Like, you're going to see some of these guys and you're going to have to play at that level. So in that sense, I definitely think he has quite a bit to prove.
Yep, I think that's absolutely fair. And now I want to go from, the probably the best player on the team last year to a guy who is starting his NBA career, Ochai Agbaji. Where are you with him in terms of what he has to prove this year? Because on one hand, it's very easy to argue for a low number or a high number, depending on your perspective.
I'm putting him at the exact same number as JB and the coaching staff, where I think this is a year where we find out a fair amount about him. But at the same time, if there are growing pains along the way and whatnot, there's the opportunity for growth and improvement. And, it's almost to be expected that with the coaching staff, there's so many new parts, you expect some growing pains. With Ochai coming to the NBA for the first time, you expect some growing pains. So I can't go too low just because there are so many other players that are going to be vying for minutes alongside him. But 6 feels about right. Like I feel good about his ability to contribute, and certainly what we saw in Summer League was very encouraging. It didn't seem like he was struggling with the NBA range. But it's hard to go too low when you look at how many mouths there are that are looking to get fed on this roster.
Yeah, I'm going to make an unfair comparison just to set at least give some frame of reference for why I think the number should be high. And it's Luke Jackson. Luke Jackson was the last lotto pick of the LeBron era, back in 2005 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And he didn't hit, and that guy kind of became like a symbol of of missed opportunity, I think, for that old front office, where it's like, I think we've talked about it quite a bit, that we felt like having a lottery pick in this draft was kind of a pleasant gift,
Mm-hmm.
So like, you don't want to squander the opportunity to pick up one last rookie scale locked up talent that can mesh with your core. So I think he has to prove, not that he is like, playoff ready and stuff like that as a rookie. That's not fair. I think he has to prove that he's a guy that deserves to be here and that fits well with the existing core of the team. Now, what's nice about that is I expect him to do both.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I am optimistic, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have anything to prove. I think he's going to have to earn real minutes. But like, when he does get a chance, he's going to have to show that, like, hey, I belong, and I make a lot of sense with the complementary talent on this team.
I agree with the protein of what you're saying there, and I don't necessarily agree with the Jackson comp.
I said it was an unfair one.
Yeah, it's not just that it's unfair, but that was such like a Luka situation where you draft someone that's so good that takes you out of the mix of getting interesting young prospects, where the Cavs already have so many guys 25 and under as well. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but I think the actual points that you were making were valid, and there's definitely something to prove. And I think even listening to his post-draft comments where he was talking about, hey, I heard the noise. I heard, oh, you drafted a 22-year-old at 14. Like, I want to prove that I still have room to grow, that I have upside, that I can come in and make a big difference. So that's why I didn't want to go too low on this, and I think 6 is an appropriate ranking. Where do you have Lauri Markkanen, Carter?
On the something to prove-ometer, I have Lauri at like a 6.5. I think to some extent
you and your halves.
I like the halves. I think he's something of a known commodity, and I think what he needs to prove is that the defense isn't going to tank if he's playing the 4.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is, as much as we all kind of thought that the Lauri at the 3 experiment would be this big defensive disaster, it also allowed him to get to play along Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. And one thing that was used as a cudgel against Evan in the Rookie of the Year analysis, and also, in just evaluating his season is that when Evan wasn't playing with Jarrett, it was the defense kind of fell off a cliff. Yeah. And I think that had a lot more to do with playing his minutes next to Lauri or Kevin, or Lauri and Kevin. Yep. On the defensive end.
And that was evidenced by the numbers in the inverse, right? Where it was Allen without Mobley. You saw that similar drop off.
Yeah. So I think especially like with Kevin Love, like you're at the point now where it's like, okay, the mobility is just not where it used to be. You're not going to have a great, there's very, very little reason that Lauri shouldn't be able to survive at the 4 next to either Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley. Yeah. He doesn't have to be great. He just needs to be tall and vertical and get to the right spots. And I think that's something that's fair for the team to ask of him. Yeah. So like, and I made, I remember mid last season, I kind of talked about how Brook Lopez was this kind of famously slow-footed, defensive sieve, and then he got to the right system, got a lot smarter, put a lot more attention on the defensive end, and became great. While Lauri doesn't have Brook's frame or insane size, he's not much shorter. And like I just think at some point, like you should be okay against bench units at the back at playing the 4. And if he can't do that, his future gets a lot more murky, because I still can't help but think Lauri at the 3. I certainly think he is objectively going to play less minutes at the 3 than he did last year. There's just more players at the 2-3 that need minutes. So like that means more minutes at the 4 for him if he wants to get on the floor, and you can't tank the defense while you're out there. So I think that ultimately, I think the number shouldn't be low for Lauri, because while he kind of his baseline is relatively set, I think some of the limitations will kind of limit the ceiling of the team until he addresses them.
Yeah, I wrestle between 6 and 7 for Lauri.
Maybe 6.5 would be a good one. Justin, yeah, maybe my half numbers aren't so bad after all.
But I'm fundamentally opposed to that, so I'm going to settle on a 6. I think a lot of the points you raised are valid. Lauri's a guy that I'm really curious to see how it looks this year, because it's very similar to Okoro, where I think having a full off season and a full understanding of what the expectations are of you are going to be is going to change how Lauri is going to prepare for this offseason, right? Like, he knows he is going to be playing minutes at the 3. Whether it's fewer or more is up in the air. I think it's a safe guess to assume fewer, but you prepare your body in different ways. You're preparing for this season in different ways. And he certainly found a home with the Cavs last year, and he was a very valuable contributor to what they had going on. And I think like the worst case with Lauri is, okay, we have a decision coming up with Kevin Love after this coming season, and maybe there is an opportunity to add a 3, and Lauri kind of graduates to the Love role and still ends up playing near starter minutes because he's splitting that time with Allen and Mobley. And if that is the case, then you have a situation where what you're saying is true. Like, he needs to prove that he can work in those matchups. But I still think that there's always going to be an opportunity for him to get some minutes at the 3, and that really did work. And I'm very curious to see what I want to see him prove is, okay, with more time to prepare for this role, what does that look like for your game? And the other thing I want to see is, how does that translate to the postseason? It's very similar to Garland, where I want to see, does that 3 big lineup work in the playoffs when teams are specifically game planning to attack whatever weaknesses you have? How malleable is he? How successful are the adjustments that involve Lauri? Like, what does that look like? Like, I feel like there's a decent amount to prove, but I also feel like he proved quite a bit to me last year, where he was still being a valuable contributor earlier in the year when the shot wasn't falling. And then as the season progressed, as he became more comfortable in that role, the offense came along as well.
I do think I am very confident in a hot start for Lauri. He's been playing.
That'd be great.
He's been playing for Finland in EuroLeague qualify and Eurobasket qualifiers. I think it's Eurobasket qualifiers. I don't remember. Either way, he's been playing international ball. He's been playing competitive basketball.
He's looking swole. He's looking big.
Well, I mean, he always looks kind of cut.
That's true.
But I think that when you come into the season like with a running start like that, it's just really valuable. So I don't know. I have very high hopes for the front end of Lauri's season.
Before we get to the last one, do you have any takes or anybody that you feel needs to be mentioned out of the Kevin Love, Lamar Stevens, Dean Wade, Ricky Rubio, Robin Lopez, Neto, Windler kind of group? Because for me, like Kevin Love, you know what to expect. I don't think he's got anything to prove. He's going to go to the Hall of Fame. Love the guy. He can stay in Cleveland as long as he wants. Lamar Stevens and Dean Wade, I have a tough time doing that because you kind of know what to expect from them, and they're like
they don't need to prove that they're more than really strong 11th and 12th men, because that's what they're being asked to be.
Yeah, and I'm sure their offseason plans individually are to do just that and to earn minutes because they're going to be competing, but that's what you expect from professionals. Rubio, Lopez, Neto, I'm sure Windler has something to prove, but I have a tough time giving a take there because there's just so many mouths to feed.
Yeah, I don't expect him to get the opportunity to prove it in a public forum because really what he needs to prove is that he's got a future in the NBA. Yeah. And when you're at that point of the rotation, it's a tough thing to prove. So I think that is what Dylan has to prove. But even if he proves that he belongs in the NBA, I suspect we will never know about it because there's just too many mouths to feed.
Well, we might know about it just maybe for a different team, right? Because there's so many mouths to feed, and I just have a hard time kind of envisioning in a healthy scenario that he'd be getting minutes over someone like Ochai even, right? So the final topic on this list, Carter, is Kobe Altman in the front office. Where are you going with this one?
I'm going with like a 4. I don't think they have that much to prove. I thought
you were going
to
go high. No. I thought you were going to go high. Elaborate.
I think that they have proven that they have a pretty good eye. Mm-hmm. I think they've proven that they value a certain type of player, and they feel like that certain type of player has proven to, these tryhards, to put it kindly, these guys who just are gym rats, USA basketball connections. They've kind of proven that they can build a solid team that makes sense, even if it's through some unconventional means. I think that there's some degree of proving it with the next step, but but you've said it multiple times this offseason that the season after next might be the win now season. This season is the win now with what you have season. So short of just like resolving the Colin thing, which I guess if you want to call that proving it, sure, but I expect it to get resolved one way or the other. I think that the real pressure and the prove it vibes for Kobe kick up at the end of the 2022-23 season, not at the beginning.
God, you copy my notes. That's very much where I'm at. I'm at a 3. I haven't seen unrealistic expectations being thrown out there or anything like that, right? Like, goal is to firmly make the playoffs next season and to see what you have in terms of internal growth. I'm not seeing like conference finals or we're going to contend or anything along those lines. Only from
Darius Garland.
Yeah, well, DG's going to set the bar high for himself. That's why he got such a high rating. But yeah, like I think next offseason is when you look at what internal growth you got from this season and start to make some decisions on where you're going to make trade-offs to win now versus keeping windows open, how to evaluate all of those assets, assuming the pick transfers over to Indiana. That changes the flexibility that you have on the trade market. You're going to have cap space for the final time. I think that's when you start to evaluate those win now moves and take another step forward. And then maybe this year, like I think there's an opportunity. I know we talked about last year being the found money year, and this is as like as fun as it gets as fans, there is an opportunity for a Memphis-like leap this season where all of a sudden it feels like gravy again, where they are winning at such a high clip because of a crazy amount of internal growth.
By the way, I suspect next year is going to be a miserable year for Memphis fans. I think they're not going to have a fun year.
Jaren getting hurt is awful, man.
Well, even
like,
if they're
I
just as good as last year, I think there's going to be a degree of like, we thought we were going to keep, we thought this was going to be forever. We were just going to keep going up. That's how it goes. So, but yeah,
and
I think
growth
you're right.
isn't always linear, right?
Nope.
Like, and I still really like them long term. I love the decision making process they make. But for the Cavs, like, unless you make that kind of a leap and then you have to make those decisions on the fly. But even if you are in that boat where, okay, we're way better than we even expected again, which I think it's somewhat unrealistic to expect those types of internal leaps to that magnitude year over year. But if that does occur, then maybe you have to make some decisions at the trade deadline of, okay, do we want to invest in this further for this season to really kind of test ourselves and evaluate how far of a run we can make. But even that there's a found money feeling to that. And I just don't feel like there's a lot for this front office to prove this year. I think they've assembled a really good group of young players. We're going to see what type of leap they can make. We have good veterans that are supporting them, good depth. I feel like the Cavs have really good depth going into this year. There just doesn't feel like there's a lot to prove for this front office this season.
Yeah. Next season, though, moving forward, is probably a 10.
I wouldn't go all the way to that because
well, I guess it depends on how the season goes, doesn't it?
Yeah, and
if it's a bad season.
and even then, I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm feeling like the contention window is a little further ahead than some people want to admit. Because even when we're talking about the expectations on Darius Garland, he's 22 years old still. Like, your prime doesn't really start until you're 26. Like, this is still going to take time. But I am interested to see how high the baseline is for this year and how far away from that contention the team feels after we've seen the product this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to... I'm glad I swerved you.
Yeah, I was expecting high, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go low on this one.
You had a whole bit planned, and I just undercut you.
You know what? Every now and then you get me, and you got me there. But big thanks to all of our listeners tuning in live on YouTube. If you guys want to support us, you can like this video, subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you want to support us via podcast, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. And until next time, go Cavs.